Hello everyone, welcome back to another Sensei series. Today we're looking at how guitarists can fake it on other stringed instruments, specifically the bass guitar, mandolin, ukulele, and banjo. Whenever I post a video where I play a range of instruments, there's inevitably a handful of comments where people say how impressive it is that I play so many. While I'm thankful for the compliments, it's not really true. I only consider myself a guitarist, but I'm able to take that knowledge and relate it to other instruments to create passable sounds. Today I'm going to show you how you can do that too. I'd like to emphasize that this video is by no means a comprehensive guide, rather a starting point. If you do want to dive deeper, I'm going to recommend Skillshare.com, who are also the sponsor of this video. Skillshare is an online learning community for creators with over 25,000 classes in design, business, and of course music. Premium membership gives you unlimited access so you can join classes for things like learning to play the ukulele, learning to play the bass, learning to play gypsy jazz guitar, and countless other topics. It's affordable, an annual subscription costs less than $10 a month, and as a bonus offer, the first 500 of you to click on the link in the description get a 2-month free trial. Without further ado, let's get into it. We're going to start things off by talking about faking it on the bass. The layout of the bass is easy enough to conceptualize as a guitarist since the strings are tuned the same as the 4 lowest pitch strings on a guitar, but down an octave. Which means if I've learned the notes on the E, A, D, and G strings on a guitar, I also know the notes on the E, A, D, and G strings of a bass too. What makes the transition between the two instruments tricky is that the bass fulfills a very different role. So while the information is nearly identical, we use it in a much different way. Generally, the bass is anchoring the harmony and will often emphasize the root note. So if, say, the guitar player is playing a C major 7, then the bass player could simply play the C root. You could get through an entire song playing only the root notes of the chord. Of course, that would be rather boring. To add some motion to my part, I might alternate between the root and the 5th of the chord. From here, you can get more and more creative with the bass part depending on what the song calls for. Generally, I'll try to highlight other notes in the chord while also maintaining focus on the root. How does one do this? Well, I'll put my root notes in places of greater rhythmic emphasis while saving my other notes for less emphasized places. The first beat of a bar is the beat with the most weight, so I'll often put a root note there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And beat 1 in the first and third bars in a 4-bar phrase will have more weight than beat 1 in the second and fourth bars, so I'll often save my roots for there. I also like to think of the next chord in a progression as my destination, and I'll try to set it up with my bass part. Say for example, I have a song that goes C for 2 bars and then F for the next 2. In my second bar of each one of those chords, I'll try to craft a line that leads to the next. How you use this stuff will be determined by your creativity. It also helps a ton to have a working understanding of music theory. There are numerous courses on that very subject over at Skillshare.com that will make everything you do in music significantly easier. And if you do find yourself drawn to the bass, you can get a closer look at this instrument through classes like Walking Bass Lines and Percussive Fingerstyle for Acoustic Bass. Alright, let's move on. The nice thing about the other instruments we'll talk about today is that unlike the bass, they fulfill a similar role in music as a guitar does, so we don't need to think about them quite as differently. For example, a mandolin is similar in the sense that it plays chords as well as lead lines. The tuning of this little guy from low to high is G, D, A, E. Each string is doubled up and the 2 partner strings are tuned to the same pitch, so we conceptualize them as one. As a guitarist, I found the best way to think about this thing is to imagine it as a guitar flipped upside down, missing the high E and B strings. On a guitar, I'd play an open G like this. To translate this to a mandolin, I forget about the 2 highest strings and flip this shape upside down. So instead of playing the 3rd fret on the thickest string, I now play it on the thinnest string, and instead of playing the 2nd fret on the 2nd thickest string, I now play it on the 2nd thinnest string. Voila! A G chord. You can use the same process to think about other chords or anything else you might play. The tricky thing about the mandolin is that the frets are so close together that you need to be really precise. This is also nice though, because you can do stretches that you could never do on a guitar, which opens up a whole bunch of new chord shapes. For example, with that G chord we looked at earlier, instead of playing that note on the 3rd fret of the E string, I can move it up to the 7th fret, giving me a nice inversion. My tiny little fingers would never be able to make this stretch on a guitar, but on a mandolin it's rather comfortable. Though the instrument's a bit higher in range than a guitar, I've always found that it fulfills a similar role. It sounds great when you're strumming, and due to the higher pitches, I find that it cuts through the mix a little bit more, giving it a nice percussive quality. Next, let's talk about perhaps the happiest instrument of them all, the ukulele. The tuning of this is G, C, E, A. And when I first got one, I spent far too much time memorizing chord shapes before I had a grand revelation. If we take a capo and put it on the 5th fret of a guitar, imagine the 2 thickest strings fell off, then the last 4 strings are tuned G, C, E, A, which is essentially a ukulele. Granted, the uppermost string on a ukulele is thinner than these 2 strings. It doesn't really change how I conceptualize it because I'm just strumming away anyway. The shapes we use on guitar correspond nicely. Take for example an open C chord when you have the capo on the 5th fret, which would make it an F. Remember, with ukulele, I'm not worrying about these 2 strings, which leaves me with this shape. And here's that shape on the ukulele. So say I have a song that goes C, G, F. Well, on guitar with a capo on the 5th fret, I would play an open G shape, a D shape, and a C shape. Forget the 2 thickest strings, we have this. And those are the shapes you'd use on a ukulele. And lastly, we have the banjo, which also isn't overly difficult to relate back to guitar. For now, let's forget about this freakish little half string and focus on the more normal ones. The layout is almost identical to the thinnest 4 strings on a guitar, and like a ukulele, I imagine that the E and A strings that would normally be here on a guitar fell off into the gutter, which leaves us with a D, G, B, but now instead of going to an E like we would on guitar, we go to another D, which is basically like we took our E string and tuned it down a step. As far as chords go, we can play the same shapes that we would on guitar, but to compensate for the lowered thinnest string, we play that note 2 frets higher. So if I were to play an A minor on guitar, it would look like this. And again, since the banjo doesn't have those 2 thickest strings, we forget about those. And since our highest string is tuned down a step, we need to play this note instead, giving us this shape. Okay, so now let's talk about this weird little string. It's tuned to a high G, and I use it as a drone string. So whenever there's a G in my chord, I'll hit it every now, letting it ring out. Typically, you won't do a ton of strumming on the banjo unless you're playing New Orleans jazz or a clawhammer style. Instead, I often find myself using more finger picking. I'll take Chet Atkins style patterns I play on guitar and transfer them over to banjo. Most banjo players will use finger picks for more accuracy and volume. I don't, because I'm merely faking it and it totally throws me off. And one final note, if you ever buy yourself a banjo, you better learn this lick. That about wraps up for today. I want to reiterate that this is very much an entry-level guide to help guitarists start faking it on these other instruments. Each of these instruments we've looked at today have unique characteristics which lead to the sounds and phrasing we associate with them, and that can only truly be unlocked with hours and hours put into them. You can start taking those next steps by taking some of those classes I mentioned provided by today's sponsor, Skillshare. There's a wealth of valuable information over there that you can browse through without even signing in. But remember, the first 500 people to click on the link in the description get a 2-month free trial, so consider checking that out. Thank you all for watching. I hope you found this information useful, and I wish you the best in exploring some new sounds. An extra big thank you to everyone who supports my channel through Patreon. If you want to see another Sensei series, you can hit that link up there. To subscribe, hit that there. Check out my merch store over there, and until next time, I'm Samurai Guitarist, and I will see you again soon.